again! In my previous video, I argued that prices are determined in markets through demand and supply. Today, I will argue that market interactions tend to lead to prices for which the quantity demanded more or less equals the quantity supplied. How can we know if demand equals supply? If demand is greater than supply, there is a shortage. If supply is greater than demand, there is an excess. How do we know there is a shortage? Without a shortage, anyone can buy something if they are willing and able to pay the price. But when there is a shortage, some people can't buy, even though they want to and can afford it. What determines who does and doesn't get to buy? There are various possibilities. One is a random lottery, but a more common solution is through queuing. Suppose, for example, that the price of apples is set too low. And suppose that sellers of apples open for business every day at 9 a.m. Buyers know that there aren't enough apples for everyone. In order to be able to buy apples, buyers start lining up before the store opens. People who care the most about buying apples will show up the earliest. At some point, the queue is so long that there's no point in joining it. The supply of apples will have run out before it's your turn. Most people would rather not have to wait in line. In other words, queuing imposes a cost. The longer the wait, the higher the cost. This queuing cost adds to the price buyers effectively pay. However, unlike paying a higher price to sellers, which benefits sellers, these queuing costs are basically a complete waste. Market transactions are, by their very nature, voluntary. In other words, no one is being forced to consume or produce anything. Suppose market interactions lead to prices for which demand more or less equals supply. Wouldn't that be pretty cool? Let's examine the historical record. Have there been excesses or shortages? And if so, when did they typically occur? Did they occur when market interactions were relatively free, or when they were obstructed somehow? Let's look first at examples of shortages, which have been far more common. In 1973, there was a shortage of gasoline in the United States, with people lining up at gas stations. The same thing happened in 1979. Why? In both cases, the government set a maximum price for gasoline that was clearly too low. Fuel shortages have happened many times, and in virtually every case, a price control was involved. Here we see images from Mexico in 2019. Here is an image from Nigeria in 2016. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy caused several refineries to shut down, leading to a significant drop in the availability of gasoline. If markets were functioning well, this would have led to a sharp increase in gas prices, causing people to economize on gas consumption for a while. But instead, there were gas shortages in New York and New Jersey. Were gas stations mistakenly charging too low prices, or was something else going on? Like 34 other states, New Jersey and New York have so-called Anti-Gouging Laws, which outlaw price increases during emergencies. So prices are not allowed to rise, which creates shortages and limits the incentive to supply more of the scarce good precisely when it is needed most. In the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, anti-gouging laws became relevant again for products such as hand sanitizer and face masks. Here is a picture of people lining up at a supermarket in Venezuela in 2014. Here's another, this time from 2018. Since 2003, the government there has imposed price controls. These controls have been expanded since. For example, in April 2020, the government announced controls on 27 basic food items. Another country that recently imposed price controls is Zimbabwe. Again, this led to widespread queuing. Queues were common in communist countries where, to put it mildly, voluntary market interactions were not the norm. Put differently, under communism, essentially all prices are controlled. We all know what this is, a traffic jam. Too many people want to use the roads available at the prevailing price, which is usually zero. The price of using the road is too low, and so we get a shortage. As with the queue, each person ends up effectively paying a price, namely the added fuel and travel time. A small number of governments have realized that prices of zero lead to shortages. For instance, in 2003, the City of London instituted a congestion charge. Companies like Uber and Lyft have had a major impact on the taxi market. Arguably, the most important innovation was that prices fluctuate. If demand is high or supply low, prices will increase. This means that it is almost always possible to get a ride. Previously, taxis would have fares fixed by the government. As a result, it could be very difficult to find a taxi during times of high demand. Many governments operate residential buildings with units intended for lower-income households. Often, however, this results in shortages. Here, for instance, is a story about people waiting in New York City. And here's another, this time from England. Waitlists are pervasive in the healthcare sectors of many countries. In Canada, for instance, the average time to receive treatment from a specialist was 20.9 weeks in 2019. In one province, the average wait was 49.3 weeks. In the United Kingdom, 4.4 million patients were on waitlists in September 2019, or 6.6% of the total population. Over 250,000 patients had been waiting for over 6 months. Are these shortages happening in relatively free markets? Not surprisingly, the answer is no. In both Canada and the UK, healthcare is dominated by a centralized government-run system. By contrast, there are no waitlists for services like haircuts, massages, or manicures. In Canada, dental care is privately run and waitlists are virtually non-existent. More poignantly, veterinary care is privately run and pets have essentially no delays to contend with. There is a long list of people waiting for an organ transplant. In February 2021, there were over 107,000 in the US, with over 17 people dying each day. The longest lists are for kidneys, followed by liver, heart, and lung. Why might there be a wait list? Not surprisingly, there is a price control in play. In this case, the maximum price is set at $0. In other words, it is legal to donate organs, but illegal to sell them. The point of this example is not to advocate free markets for organs. Rather, the point is to show that price controls lead to shortages wherever they are imposed. While shortages are more common, there are some cases of excesses. A famous example comes from Europe, where starting in the 1970s, the European Union experimented with minimum prices for agricultural products such as butter and milk. These prices were often high, leading to excess production. The result was so-called butter mountains and milk lakes, and also excesses in beef, grain, and wine. The EU provides a guarantee to farmers that it will purchase any products they cannot sell to consumers. While there have been efforts to curb these excesses, they still occur to this day. It is possible to find shortages that are not caused by government policy. For example, each summer the Public Theatre Company stages a Shakespeare production in New York's Central Park. Instead of selling tickets to the performances, they give out tickets for free every morning. As a result, people queue up. Here is another example of a queue not created by government policy. People are lining up in front of an Apple store in order to be one of the first to buy an iPhone X. As a reminder, we examined the question whether free market interactions tend to lead to shortages and excesses, or whether they instead occur when market interactions are obstructed. The historical record suggests that shortages and excesses are almost always the result of government policies, in particular price controls. At this point, some of you may be thinking, but some goods and services are really important. We need to make sure everyone has access to them. Won't price controls make people able to afford things like food, clean water, and healthcare? As we have seen, price controls don't really make goods cheaper, as people end up paying a higher price, for instance, by waiting in line. Moreover, price controls reduce the amounts supplied, thereby making important goods even more scarce. But if price controls don't work, how can we make sure everyone can afford basic life necessities? There are essentially three ways of allowing people to consume more goods and services than they would otherwise be able to afford. The first is charity. The second is theft. The third is transferring tax revenues. Raising taxes is costly, but these costs are generally far lower than those created by price controls. To what degree these costs are worth paying is an interesting question, but there is no simple or straightforward answer. People have different opinions about the appropriate amount of government transfer payments. I hope you enjoyed this video.